The crystal chandelier above the dining table cast dancing shadows across the mahogany surface as my stepmother Patricia adjusted the place settings for the third time. Everything had to be perfect for tonight's dinner party, the monthly gathering where the most influential families in Westfield gathered to discuss business deals, charity galas, and who was worthy of their exclusive circles. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I stood in the kitchen doorway wearing a simple navy dress from Target, watching my family prepare for another evening where I would be the invisible daughter, the one they tolerated but never celebrated. My father, Richard Thornton, emerged from his study wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair gleaming under the recessed lighting. At 62, he commanded every room he entered with the confidence of a man who had built a real estate empire from nothing and never let anyone forget it. "Emma, you're blocking the doorway," Patricia said without looking up from her flower arrangement. At 55, my stepmother moved through our sprawling colonial home like she owned every inch of it, which, technically, she did through marriage. Her blonde hair was styled in the kind of expensive waves that required weekly salon appointments, and her emerald cocktail dress probably cost more than most people made in a month. I stepped aside as the catering staff bustled past, carrying silver trays laden with appetizers that looked more like art installations than food. This was Patricia's domain, where appearances mattered more than substance, where the right wine pairing could make or break a business relationship. My half-brother Jason bounded down the mahogany staircase, his footsteps echoing through the two-story foyer. At 28, he was everything my father had hoped for in a son: Harvard MBA, sharp suit, sharper ambition, and the kind of natural charisma that made clients trust him with million-dollar investments. His law degree from Columbia hung prominently in the family office, right next to my father's real estate licenses and Patricia's interior design certifications. "The Hendersons just pulled up," Jason announced, straightening his tie. "Dad, remember they're looking to expand their portfolio into commercial properties. I've prepared some projections." My father's face lit up with the pride I had stopped expecting years ago. That's my boy, always thinking 3 steps ahead. The doorbell chimed, and Patricia smoothed her dress one final time. "Places, everyone. Richard, remember to mention Jason's promotion to senior partner, and Emma." She paused, her eyes scanning my outfit with barely concealed disappointment. "Try to look engaged when people ask what you do." What I did. The question that always made family gatherings feel like interrogations. The Hendersons entered first. Robert, a commercial contractor with calloused hands and a genuine smile, and his wife Margaret, who ran the town's most successful interior design firm. Behind them came the Blackwoods, old money that had been quietly accumulating properties for 3 generations, followed by the Parkers, a young couple who had made their fortune in tech and were now diversifying into real estate. Within minutes, our living room buzzed with conversations about market trends, zoning laws, and investment opportunities. I found my usual spot near the grand piano, close enough to appear part of the gathering, but far enough away to avoid unwanted attention. "Jason, congratulations on making senior partner at Henderson & Associates," Robert Henderson said, raising his wine glass. 28 years old and already running commercial deals. Your father must be proud." My father practically glowed. "Jason's been handling our largest accounts for 2 years now. Last month alone, he closed deals worth $15 million in commercial properties." The group murmured appreciative sounds. Margaret Henderson turned to me with the polite smile reserved for family members who didn't quite fit the success narrative. "And Emma, what is it you do again?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I felt all eyes turn toward me, some curious, others already moving on to more interesting topics. Before I could answer, my father stepped in with his practiced response. "Emma works in property management," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Small residential stuff, apartments, rental units, nothing too complicated." The dismissal was subtle but clear. Nothing too complicated. As if I couldn't handle anything requiring real skill or intelligence. "That's nice," Margaret said with the same tone people use when discussing the weather. "Property management is certainly necessary." Patricia seized the moment to redirect attention back to more impressive topics. Jason just secured the Henderson account for the new shopping complex on Maple Street. 200,000 square feet of retail space. Actually, Jason said, his confidence filling the room, we're looking at expanding that project. Dad and I think Westfield is ready for luxury condominiums. High-end units, million-dollar price points. The conversation flowed back to serious business. Development projects, financing options, market projections. I listened to my half-brother discuss strategies that would reshape our hometown skyline while I remained the footnote in the family's success story. Robert Blackwood, whose family had owned property in New England for decades, leaned forward with interest. The luxury market is tricky, but if anyone can make it work in Westfield, it's the Thornton family. Richard, you've always had an eye for profitable investments. My father basked in the compliment. It's about understanding the market, knowing when to take calculated risks. That's something I've tried to teach both my children, though. He glanced in my direction with a slight shake of his head. Some lessons take longer to stick than others. The words stung because they were delivered so casually, as if my inability to grasp his business wisdom was an accepted family fact. Around the room, successful adults nodded knowingly, as if they all had relatives who just couldn't quite reach the family standard. Emma's always been more of a creative type, Patricia added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She likes to do things her own way, even when conventional wisdom suggests otherwise. Creative type. Code for impractical dreamer. Sarah Parker, the tech entrepreneur, tried to be kind. There's nothing wrong with marching to your own drummer. The world needs all types of people. But her husband David was already steering the conversation back to business. Speaking of conventional wisdom, Richard, what's your take on the interest rate trends? We're considering leveraging some of our tech gains into real estate. For the next hour, I watched my family perform the dance they had perfected over years of these gatherings. Jason presented ideas with confidence that commanded respect. Patricia played the perfect hostess, guiding conversations and making connections. My father held court like the real estate king he had become, dispensing wisdom and making deals with handshake agreements that would be formalized in boardrooms the following week. I was the supporting cast member who occasionally got a line but never moved the plot forward. As dinner was served, the conversation turned to recent successes and future plans. Jason described his latest commercial deal with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved the game. Patricia discussed her charity work with the hospital board, emphasizing the substantial donations the family had made. My father shared details about a new development project that would bring luxury shopping and dining to downtown Westfield. Emma, you've been quiet tonight, David Parker said during a lull in conversation. What projects are you working on? Before I could respond, my father answered for me. Emma manages a small portfolio of rental properties. Dozen units, maybe 15. It keeps her busy. The number was wrong. I actually managed over 60 units, but correcting him would only draw more attention to what the family clearly considered my small-scale endeavors. That sounds challenging, Sarah said diplomatically. Dealing with tenants, maintenance issues, all the day-to-day operations. It's honest work, Patricia added, as if she were defending a relative's job at the grocery store. Not glamorous, but someone has to handle the basic properties. Basic properties. The phrase echoed in my mind as dessert was served and the conversation moved on to vacation plans and upcoming social events. I had become accustomed to being minimized, but tonight felt different. Perhaps it was the way they discussed Jason's accomplishments with such reverence, while treating my work like a hobby that paid the bills. As the evening wound down and guests prepared to leave, I overheard Robert Henderson speaking quietly with my father near the front door. Your son is impressive, Richard. Sharp mind, good instincts, the kind of person we like doing business with. Jason's always been special, my father replied. Natural talent for this business. Unfortunately, not all children inherit their parents' abilities. He didn't look in my direction, but the implication was clear. I was the child who hadn't inherited the Thornton business gene, the disappointing daughter who settled for managing small apartments while her brother reshaped cityscapes. After the last guest departed, my family gathered in the living room for their traditional post-dinner analysis. Patricia kicked off her heels and curled up on the leather sofa while Jason loosened his tie and poured himself a scotch from my father's collection. Excellent evening, Patricia declared. The Hendersons are definitely interested in the Maple Street project, and the Parkers want to schedule a meeting next week. David Parker asked some good questions about market timing, Jason added. I think they're ready to move significant money into real estate. My father settled into his favorite armchair, looking satisfied with the night's networking. This is how business gets done: relationships, trust, reputation. You can't build wealth without building credibility first. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. I stood to excuse myself, but my father's voice stopped me at the doorway. Emma, I hope you were paying attention tonight. This is what real success looks like. Maybe it's time you considered expanding your horizons, thinking bigger than apartment rentals. The condescension in his voice was gentle, but unmistakable. Even now, at 31 years old, he spoke to me like a child who needed guidance finding her way in the adult world. I'm doing fine, Dad, I said quietly. Fine isn't a Thornton standard, he replied. We aim higher than fine. As I climbed the stairs to my old bedroom, the only space in the house that hadn't been redecorated to Patricia's exacting standards, I carried the weight of another evening where I had been measured and found wanting. Tomorrow, Jason would wake up energized by new business opportunities, while I would return to my small apartment in town, managing properties my family considered beneath their notice. But what they didn't know, what none of them suspected, was that their evening of casual dismissal was about to collide with a reality that would redefine everything they thought they knew about success, failure, and which member of the Thornton family actually understood the real estate game. In 3 days, a single phone call would shatter their carefully constructed narrative about the disappointing daughter who couldn't grasp the family business. They would learn that while they had been playing small-town real estate games, I had been playing a completely different game. One where the stakes were higher than any of them had imagined, and where I held all the cards. The rejection started early, rooted in circumstances I couldn't control, and choices that defined my childhood before I was old enough to understand their consequences. I was 7 when my mother, Linda, died in a car accident on Route 9 during a winter storm. She had been driving home from her job at the town library, where she worked as a children's librarian despite having a master's degree in literature. My father always said she was too idealistic, too willing to settle for meaningful work instead of profitable work. After her death, those criticisms felt like prophecy rather than judgment. Within 18 months, my father had remarried Patricia Whitmore, a successful interior designer whose client list included half the wealthy families in Westfield. She brought organization to our household, expensive taste to our home, and eventually a son who would become everything I apparently wasn't. The first sign of my future status came during my 10th birthday party. Patricia had planned an elaborate celebration in our backyard, complete with a professional photographer and enough decorations to rival a wedding. My school friends seemed overwhelmed by the opulence, whispering about our house size and the catered food. When it came time to open presents, my father handed me a savings account passbook with $500 deposited inside. This is the beginning of your financial education, Emma, he announced proudly. Every birthday and Christmas will add to it. By the time you're 18, you'll understand the value of compound interest. I was 10. I wanted a bicycle or art supplies, not a lecture about financial responsibility. But I smiled and thanked him, while my friends looked confused by the adult nature of the gift. 2 years later, when Jason was born, his nursery renovation cost more than my college fund. School became my refuge, particularly mathematics and economics classes where abstract concepts made perfect sense to my analytical mind. While other kids struggled with percentages and basic algebra, I found comfort in numbers that behaved predictably, unlike the emotional landscape of my home. In high school, I discovered a natural aptitude for business mathematics and statistics. My junior year economics teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, pulled me aside after class one day to discuss my potential. Emma, have you considered studying finance or economics in college? Your analytical skills are exceptional, and you have an intuitive understanding of market principles that most students never develop. When I mentioned this conversation at dinner, my father seemed pleased but surprised. Economics? That's a serious field. Are you sure you're ready for that level of academic rigor? Jason, then 6 years old, piped up from his booster seat. What's economics? It's the study of money and how businesses work, my father explained patiently. Very complicated stuff that requires a special kind of mind. The implication was clear. He wasn't sure I possessed that special kind of mind. My SAT scores were exceptional, 1520 out of 1600, and I received acceptance letters from several prestigious universities, including Boston College, Northeastern, and even Harvard's economics program. But my father's reaction was measured rather than celebratory. These are good schools, Emma, but they're expensive. We need to think practically about return on investment. Meanwhile, he had already started a college fund for Jason that would cover any institution he chose to attend. I ended up at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, a respected state school with an excellent economics program and reasonable tuition. My father presented this as a practical choice, emphasizing fiscal responsibility and avoiding student debt. When Jason later received a full-ride scholarship to Harvard, my father would frequently mention how smart financial planning meant Jason could attend his dream school without family financial strain. College opened my eyes to possibilities beyond Westfield's insular business community. My professors recognized something in my analytical approach that my family had never acknowledged. During my sophomore year, Professor Susan Chen recommended me for a competitive internship at a Boston investment firm. Emma, you have a rare combination of mathematical precision and strategic thinking, she explained. This internship could open doors to opportunities you haven't even considered yet. The internship was unpaid, requiring me to work weekends at a campus coffee shop to cover living expenses while commuting to Boston 3 days a week. When I called home excited about learning portfolio management and market analysis, my father's response was lukewarm. That's nice, sweetheart. Just remember that real estate is more stable than stock market speculation. When you're ready to build actual wealth, property investment is the reliable path. He couldn't understand that I wasn't just learning about stocks. I was learning about capital flows, risk assessment, and investment strategies that applied to any asset class, including real estate. In my senior year, I wrote my thesis on residential property investment patterns in small New England towns. The research required analyzing decades of property records, tax assessments, and demographic data to identify investment opportunities that traditional metrics missed. My advisor, Dr. Michael Thompson, called it graduate-level work and encouraged me to consider pursuing an MBA. When I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in economics and a minor in mathematics, my family attended the ceremony but seemed more focused on Jason's upcoming middle school graduation than my academic achievement. College graduation is just the beginning, my father said during the drive home. Now you need to find your place in the real world. Finding my place meant returning to Westfield and starting at the bottom of the local real estate market. My father offered me a position as a junior assistant at Thornton Properties, filing paperwork and showing rental apartments to prospective tenants. Everyone starts somewhere, he explained. Even Jason will need to prove himself when he's old enough to join the business. But Jason wouldn't start as a filing clerk. By age 16, he was already accompanying my father to business meetings and investment property viewings, learning the family business through observation and mentorship while I organized paperwork and scheduled appointments. The turning point came during my second year working for my father. I had been analyzing rental property performance data and noticed patterns that suggested several buildings in downtown Westfield were significantly undervalued due to poor management and deferred maintenance. I prepared a detailed proposal outlining how strategic renovations and improved property management could triple rental income within 2 years. The analysis included comparable market data, renovation cost estimates, and projected return on investment calculations that demonstrated the opportunity. When I presented the proposal to my father, he listened politely but dismissed the idea as too risky. Emma, you're thinking like an academic, not a business owner. These properties are cheap because they're problem properties. We focus on stable investments with proven track records. 6 months later, a Boston investment group purchased the exact buildings I had identified, implemented similar improvements, and sold them for a profit that exceeded my projections. My father's reaction when I mentioned this was a shrug. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. One lucky guess doesn't make you a real estate expert. That comment crystallized everything wrong with my position in the family hierarchy. Jason could voice half-formed ideas and receive encouragement to develop them further. I could present meticulously researched proposals and have them dismissed as lucky guesses. The pattern continued for 3 years. I would identify opportunities, conduct thorough analysis, and present professional recommendations that my father would either ignore or assign to other agents in the firm. Meanwhile, Jason was being groomed for leadership despite having no formal business education or real-world experience. When Jason announced his engagement to Melissa Crawford, daughter of a prominent local attorney, my father immediately began planning for Jason to take over significant portions of the business after their wedding. "Marriage settles a man down," he explained to Patricia one evening when they thought I wasn't listening. "Jason's ready for real responsibility now." I was 28, had been working in real estate for 5 years, and had never been offered real responsibility beyond managing small rental units. The final straw came during a family business meeting where my father announced his intention to expand Thornton Properties into commercial development. He had identified a large tract of land on the outskirts of town that could be developed into a mixed-use complex with retail space and luxury condominiums. "This is a multi-million-dollar opportunity," he said, spreading architectural plans across his desk. "Jason will head up the commercial development division once we secure financing." I had been quietly researching the same property for months and had discovered significant zoning issues and environmental concerns that would make development extremely difficult and expensive. When I tried to share this information, my father cut me off. "Emma, this is complex commercial development, not residential property management. Let the adults handle the big-picture decisions." Jason was 26 and had never managed a development project of any size. I was 28 with 5 years of experience and a degree in economics, but I was still being treated like the child who needed protection from complicated adult concepts. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to fight for recognition within my family's narrow vision of my capabilities, I would build something they couldn't dismiss or minimize. I withdrew my savings, modest by their standards but significant to me, and began researching investment opportunities they would never consider. Small residential properties in overlooked neighborhoods, buildings with good bones but poor management, opportunities that required the kind of detailed analysis I had learned in college, but my family considered academic rather than practical. Within 6 months, I had purchased my first property, a small apartment building in a working-class neighborhood that everyone else had written off as declining. The building was structurally sound but needed cosmetic improvements and professional management to reach its potential. My family's reaction was predictable. "Emma's bought a little building in the wrong part of town," Patricia announced at a family dinner. "It's sweet that she wants to try property ownership, even if the location isn't ideal." They had no idea that this little building was generating more profit per square foot than most of their commercial properties, or that I was already identifying my next acquisition target. Over the following 3 years, I quietly assembled a portfolio of undervalued properties that I renovated and managed with meticulous attention to both financial performance and tenant satisfaction. My family remained focused on their high-profile commercial deals, while I built a foundation they couldn't see because they weren't looking for it. They thought I was playing small-time landlord while they pursued serious real estate investment. They had no idea I was laying the groundwork for something that would eventually encompass everything they thought they owned, including the very roof over their heads. The call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing property inspection reports in my downtown office. I had moved out of the family home 2 years earlier, renting a modest apartment above a bakery on Main Street, while reinvesting every dollar of profit back into my growing portfolio. My morning routine was simple: coffee, financial reports, and planning the day's property visits before most of Westfield was awake. The number on my phone screen was unfamiliar, but something about the early hour suggested urgency rather than solicitation. "Is this Emma Thornton?" The voice belonged to a woman, professional but strained. "Yes, speaking." "This is Jennifer Walsh from Atlantic Financial Services. I'm calling about your father's mortgage payment. There seems to be some confusion about the account details." I set down my coffee, suddenly alert. "I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong number. I'm not involved in my father's financial matters." According to our records, you're listed as the contact for account number 77492-156. The payment is currently 47 days overdue, and we need to discuss immediate resolution to avoid foreclosure proceedings. Foreclosure, the word hit like ice water. There must be some mistake. My father owns Thornton Properties. He's never missed a mortgage payment in his life. Ma'am, I'm looking at documentation that shows this property is owned by Pinnacle Holdings LLC, and you're listed as the primary contact for all communications regarding this mortgage. Pinnacle Holdings. The name meant nothing to me, but the mortgage account number triggered a memory that made my stomach drop. I pulled out my laptop and accessed my private investment files, scrolling through acquisition records from 18 months ago. There it was, property acquisition number 47, a large residential mortgage purchased as part of a distressed debt portfolio from a bank that was liquidating underperforming loans. I had bought dozens of these mortgages at significant discounts, seeing them as steady income streams from reliable borrowers who were temporarily behind on payments. I had never looked at the individual property addresses. "What's the property address?" I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. 247 Elmwood Drive, Westfield, Massachusetts. My childhood home. The colonial mansion, where last week's dinner party had showcased my family's success. The address where my father had built his real estate empire and Patricia had created her perfect domestic showcase. I owned their mortgage. "Ma'am, are you still there?" "Yes, I'm here. Can you send me the complete file on this account?" "Certainly." "Should I use the email address we have on file?" I confirmed my email while my mind raced through the implications. 18 months ago, I had purchased a portfolio of distressed mortgages without examining each individual property. The investment had been purely financial, acquiring debt at below-market rates from borrowers who were struggling but likely to recover. I had never imagined that one of those borrowers was my own family. Within an hour, the complete mortgage file arrived in my inbox. The documentation told a story my family had carefully hidden from their social circle and, apparently, from me. Richard Thornton had refinanced the family home 3 years ago, borrowing against the property's equity to fund his commercial development projects. The original mortgage had been manageable, but he had taken a high-interest loan secured by the house to finance the Maple Street shopping complex that Jason had been so proud to discuss at dinner parties. The project had failed spectacularly. Cost overruns, permit delays, and construction problems had turned a profitable venture into a financial disaster. Rather than admit the failure publicly, my father had been making minimum payments on personal credit lines and business loans, while the mortgage payments fell behind. The bank had eventually sold the delinquent mortgage to a debt acquisition company, which had packaged it with hundreds of similar loans and sold the entire portfolio to investment firms like mine that specialized in distressed real estate debt. I scrolled through payment records that painted a picture of escalating financial distress. My father, the man who lectured about fiscal responsibility and smart investments, had leveraged his family's home to chase a high-risk development deal that had bankrupted his business. The irony was staggering. While dismissing my small-scale property investments as unsophisticated, he had been gambling with the family's financial stability on projects he didn't understand and couldn't manage. My phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed Dad. "Emma, sweetheart, I need to talk to you about something important." His voice carried a strain I had never heard before. "Could you come by the house this morning?" "What's this about, Dad?" "It's complicated. Family business that requires a delicate touch. I think your perspective might be helpful." My perspective. After years of dismissing my analytical abilities, he suddenly wanted my input on family business. "I'll be there in an hour." I spent that hour researching everything I could find about Thornton Properties' recent financial situation. Public records revealed a pattern of business loans, property liens, and legal filings that painted a picture of a company in serious trouble. The successful real estate empire my family had been showcasing was largely built on borrowed money and failed investments. The Maple Street project alone had generated over $2 million in cost overruns. Subcontractor liens, permit violations, and construction delays had turned what should have been a profitable development into a legal and financial nightmare. My father had borrowed against everything he owned to keep the project moving forward, and when it finally collapsed, the debt remained. When I arrived at the family home, my father was waiting in his study, the same room where he had dismissed my investment proposals and lectured about practical business decisions. Today, he looked older, smaller, his usual commanding presence diminished by circumstances he couldn't control. "Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to keep this conversation confidential." I sat in the leather chair across from his desk, the same seat where I had presented countless investment ideas that he had rejected as too risky or too small scale. "We're having some temporary cash flow issues," he began carefully. "Nothing serious, just timing problems with some development projects. The bank is being unreasonable about payment schedules." Temporary cash flow issues. I had the mortgage file in my briefcase that told a very different story. "I was wondering if you might be able to help bridge a short-term gap. Maybe $20,000 or $30,000, just until the commercial properties start generating revenue again." $20,000. He was asking me to loan him money to save the house, not knowing that I already owned the mortgage he was struggling to pay. "Dad, how serious are these cash flow problems?" His laugh was forced, unconvincing. "Nothing we can't handle. Your old dad has been through rough patches before. This is just a temporary situation while we restructure some debt." Restructure debt. The euphemisms piled up while he avoided admitting the scope of his financial crisis. "What exactly do you need the money for?" "Mortgage payments, property taxes, general operating expenses. Nothing dramatic, just keeping things current while we sort out the bigger picture." I opened my briefcase and pulled out the mortgage file. "Is this the mortgage you're talking about?" His face went white as he recognized the letterhead and account numbers. "Where did you get this?" "Atlantic Financial Services called me this morning. Apparently I'm the contact person for this account." The silence stretched between us as he processed the implications. I watched him realize that his daughter, the one he had dismissed as incapable of understanding complex financial matters, was sitting across from him holding the mortgage to his house. "I don't understand," he said finally. "How could you be involved with our mortgage?" "I bought it, Dad, 18 months ago as part of an investment portfolio. I had no idea it was your house until the collection agency called this morning." His shoulders sagged as the full weight of the situation settled on him. The daughter he had treated as financially naive had unknowingly become his creditor. The family member he had excluded from serious business decisions now held the power to foreclose on his home. "Emma, I can explain everything. The Maple Street project hit some unexpected complications, and we had to make some short-term financing decisions. You mortgaged the family home to fund a development project. It was supposed to be temporary. The project was going to generate enough profit to pay off everything and leave us in a stronger position than before. But it didn't." "No," he admitted quietly, "it didn't." I looked around the study that had been the symbol of his success, the room where he had built his reputation as a savvy businessman and wise investor. The irony was overwhelming. While he had been lecturing me about practical financial decisions, he had been making the kind of high-risk, emotional investments that he had always warned me against. "Dad, how many people know about this?" "No one. Patricia thinks we're having minor cash flow issues. Jason doesn't know anything about the financial details." So the perfect family image was built on secrets and borrowed money, maintained by a man who was desperately trying to avoid admitting that his business empire was crumbling. "What's your plan for resolving this?" "I was hoping, since you own the mortgage now, maybe we could work out some kind of family arrangement. Modified payment terms, something that gives us time to get back on our feet." He was asking me to save him from the consequences of decisions he had made while dismissing my financial judgment as inadequate. I closed the mortgage file and met his eyes. "Dad, we need to have a very honest conversation about exactly how serious these problems are." What I was about to discover would make the mortgage situation look like a minor inconvenience compared to the full scope of his financial collapse. That evening, I sat in my apartment above the bakery with 3 laptops open, diving deep into public records that would reveal the true scope of my father's financial empire, or what remained of it. What I discovered over the next 72 hours would fundamentally change my understanding of everything I thought I knew about the Thornton family's success. I started with property records, cross-referencing every address associated with Thornton properties against mortgage databases lien filings, and tax assessments. The initial results were alarming enough. 17 properties carried mortgages that exceeded their current market values, and 5 commercial buildings were in various stages of foreclosure proceedings. But the deeper I dug, the more complex the picture became. Thornton Properties wasn't just one company, it was a web of interconnected LLCs, partnerships, and holding companies that had been created to obscure the true financial relationships between assets and liabilities. My father had structured his business empire like a shell game, moving debt between entities to avoid triggering automatic defaults while maintaining the appearance of solvency. The Maple Street project that had caused the initial crisis was actually the tip of an iceberg that had been growing for years. Through a network of subsidiary companies, my father had been borrowing against existing properties to fund new acquisitions, then borrowing against those properties to fund development projects, creating a cascade of interdependent debt that required constant cash flow to sustain. I mapped out the relationships between 23 different business entities, each one responsible for different aspects of the Thornton Properties operation. What emerged was a picture of a man who had confused complexity with sophistication, creating an unnecessarily elaborate corporate structure that magnified risk instead of managing it. The most shocking discovery came when I traced the ownership chain of several properties back to their original financing sources. 3 buildings that my father claimed to own outright were actually subject to leaseback agreements with a Boston investment fund. He had sold the properties years ago, but continued to operate them as if they were still his, paying what amounted to rent while telling everyone, including his family, that he owned them. My phone rang as I was printing out corporate filings for the 4th subsidiary company I had discovered that day. "Emma, it's Marcus Chen from Boston Capital Advisors." I recognized the name. He was Jason's college roommate who had gone into private equity after Harvard Business School. "I heard through Jason that your family might be interested in some strategic consulting work." This was unexpected. Jason had never mentioned reaching out to his network for help with family business issues. "What kind of consulting are you thinking about?" "Well, Jason called yesterday asking about debt restructuring options and distressed asset management. He seemed to think your father's company might benefit from some professional financial analysis." So Jason knew about the financial problems. My father had claimed that no one in the family was aware of the scope of the crisis, but apparently he had been selectively sharing information. "Did Jason give you any specifics about the situation?" "He mentioned some cash flow challenges and wondered about consolidation strategies." "To be honest, Emma, I was surprised to hear from him. From what I understood, you were the one in the family with the economics background. Even Jason's college friends knew about my educational credentials, but my own family had kept me out of discussions about financial strategy." "Marcus, what would be involved in this kind of consulting engagement?" "Comprehensive financial analysis, debt restructuring recommendations, possibly some asset liquidation to improve cash flow. Standard stuff for companies that have grown faster than their capital structure can support." After ending the call, I realized that my father's request for a $20,000 loan had been a test. He wanted to see if I would be willing to help without asking too many questions. Meanwhile, he had been discussing much larger financial strategies with Jason, who had enough sense to reach out to professionals for advice. I spent the next day conducting what amounted to a forensic audit of Thornton Properties, using the same analytical techniques I had learned in college and refined through years of managing my own investments. The picture that emerged was simultaneously worse and more interesting than I had expected. The company wasn't just insolvent, it was creatively insolvent. My father had developed increasingly sophisticated methods for moving money between accounts, deferring payments, and restructuring debt to avoid immediate consequences. In some ways, it was an impressive display of financial engineering. In other ways, it was a house of cards that could collapse with a single strong wind. But hidden within the wreckage of failed projects and over-leveraged properties, I found something unexpected: several assets that were genuinely valuable and could be salvaged with proper management. The downtown office building that housed Thornton Properties was free and clear, with no outstanding mortgages or liens. A small shopping center on the outskirts of town was generating steady rental income and had been undervalued in recent assessments. Most surprisingly, my father owned a 20-acre parcel of undeveloped land that had been purchased 15 years ago and forgotten in the rush to pursue more exciting projects. I researched recent sales of comparable land parcels and discovered that the forgotten 20 acres were now worth almost $3 million due to changing zoning laws and expanding development pressure from the neighboring town. My father was sitting on an asset that could resolve most of his financial problems, but he had either forgotten about it or failed to recognize its current value. The irony was overwhelming. While struggling to make mortgage payments on his personal residence, he owned land that could pay off most of his business debts and provide capital for sustainable growth, if he was willing to sell it. But there was something else hidden in the property records that stopped me cold. According to the documentation, the 20-acre parcel wasn't owned by Thornton Properties or any of its subsidiary companies. It was owned by Emma Thornton individually. I stared at the screen, reading the ownership information multiple times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding something. According to the Registry of Deeds, my father had transferred ownership of the land to me in 2018, 3 years ago, using a quitclaim deed that had been filed but never mentioned to me. I had no memory of signing any documents related to this property, but when I searched my personal files, I found a folder labeled Tax Documents 2018 that contained several papers I had signed without reading carefully. Mixed in with routine tax forms was a deed transfer document that I had apparently signed during one of my father's annual paperwork sessions, where he had me sign various business documents that he claimed were routine filings. He had transferred ownership of his most valuable asset to me, probably to protect it from business creditors, without telling me what I was signing. I now own not just his mortgage, but also his most valuable piece of undeveloped real estate. The next morning, I called my father and asked him to meet me at a neutral location, the coffee shop downtown where I often worked on investment analysis. I needed to understand exactly what he knew about my ownership of the land parcel, and what his long-term plans were for resolving the business crisis. He arrived looking haggard, clearly having spent sleepless nights worrying about financial pressures that were beyond his ability to manage. We sat in a corner booth where I spread out printouts of property records, corporate filings, and financial statements. Dad, I need you to walk me through the complete financial picture. Not just the mortgage payments, but everything. For the next 2 hours, he laid out the full scope of his business problems with the detailed precision of a man who had been living with these pressures for years. The complexity was staggering, but what emerged was a clear pattern. He had been robbing Peter to pay Paul for so long that he had lost track of who owed what to whom. There's something else, I said, pulling out the land deed. According to public records, I own 20 acres of undeveloped land that you transferred to me in 2018. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, calculation, and finally resignation. I forgot about that, he admitted. We were restructuring some assets to protect them from potential business liabilities. I meant to explain it to you, but then the transfer was complete and everything was working smoothly, so I didn't want to complicate things. Dad, that land is worth almost $3 million. The number hit him like a physical blow. $3 million? I paid $80,000 for it 15 years ago. Zoning changes and development pressure have increased the value dramatically. You could sell it and resolve most of your financial problems. But I don't own it anymore, you do. The weight of that realization settled between us. In trying to protect his assets from creditors, he had inadvertently given me the power to save or destroy his business empire. Emma, he said quietly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to consider it carefully. Would you be willing to sell that land and use the proceeds to help stabilize the family business? The question hung in the air while I processed everything I had learned over the past 3 days. My father, the man who had dismissed my financial judgment for years, was now asking me to make a $3 million decision that would determine the future of his business and the family's financial stability. But before I could answer, I needed to understand one more thing: exactly how much of the Thornton Properties empire I actually controlled, and whether saving it was even possible. I made my decision during the drive home from the coffee shop, but I needed one more family gathering to reveal the complete truth. I called Patricia and suggested hosting a family dinner to discuss some important financial opportunities that could benefit everyone. She was delighted to organize another showcase evening, completely unaware that this dinner would be unlike any other in the Thornton family history. 3 days later, they were all assembled in the same dining room where I had been dismissed as a failure just weeks earlier. Jason arrived with Melissa, both of them glowing with excitement about their upcoming wedding and the honeymoon they were planning in Europe. Patricia had prepared another elaborate meal, and my father sat at the head of the table with the forced confidence of a man trying to maintain appearances while his world crumbled around him. Emma mentioned she has some business opportunities to discuss, Patricia said, as she served the main course. It's wonderful to see you finally taking an interest in serious investments. Actually, I said, setting down my fork, I wanted to update everyone on some investments I've already made. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents. Over the past 5 years, I've been building a portfolio of real estate investments that I think you'll find interesting. Jason leaned forward with the patronizing smile he had perfected during business school. That's great, Emma. Property management is a good foundation for understanding real estate investment. Are you looking to expand into commercial properties? I've already expanded into commercial properties, Jason. In fact, I own several buildings downtown, including the office complex where Henderson and Associates has their headquarters. The statement landed like a bomb in the middle of Patricia's perfect dinner party. Jason's smile froze as he processed the implications. His law firm was paying rent to his half-sister, the family failure he had been condescending to for years. That's impossible, Melissa said with a nervous laugh. That building is worth millions. $4.2 million, according to the most recent assessment, I replied calmly. I bought it 18 months ago when the previous owner was facing bankruptcy. My father had gone very still, his face pale as he began to understand the scope of what I was revealing. Emma, Patricia interrupted, I think there might be some confusion about… There's no confusion, Patricia. I've been building a real estate investment portfolio for 5 years, while you all assumed I was playing small-time landlord. My company, Pinnacle Holdings, now owns 47 properties worth approximately $18 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Melissa looked confused, Jason appeared to be calculating something in his head, and Patricia stared at me as if I had announced I was from another planet. Pinnacle Holdings, my father said slowly, that's the company that owns our mortgage. Yes, Dad, I own your mortgage. I also own the Henderson Building, 3 apartment complexes on the east side of town, the strip mall where Jason gets his hair cut, and approximately 60% of the rental properties in downtown Westfield. Jason found his voice first, though it came out as a croak. How is that possible? You don't have that kind of money. I started with the money Mom left me when she died, plus my savings from working at minimum wage jobs during college while you got a full allowance. I bought my first property with a down payment of $12,000 and leveraged the rental income to acquire additional properties. I pulled out a portfolio summary and placed it in the center of the table. While you were all focused on prestigious commercial developments and high-profile deals, I was buying undervalued properties in working-class neighborhoods and managing them properly. Turns out there's good money in treating tenants fairly and maintaining buildings correctly. Patricia was the first to look at the numbers, her face going white as she absorbed the scope of my holdings. This says your annual rental income is over $2 million. That's net income, after expenses and taxes. Gross rental income is closer to $3.5 million annually. But how did we not know? Jason demanded. How could you build something this large without anyone noticing? Because none of you were paying attention. You were so convinced that I was a failure, that you never looked closely at what I was actually doing. When I told you I was managing rental properties, you assumed I meant a few small apartments. When I said I was investing in real estate, you thought I was playing with pocket change. My father finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma, what do you want from us? The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. He understood that I now held their financial future in my hands, but he didn't know what I planned to do with that power. I want an honest conversation about the family business and where it goes from here, I said. But first, I think everyone should understand exactly how serious Dad's financial problems are. I pulled out the analysis I had prepared of Thornton Properties' debt structure and began walking them through the numbers. As the scope of the crisis became clear, Patricia's composure cracked completely. Richard, you told me these were temporary cash flow issues. You said everything would be resolved once the development projects were complete. The development projects failed, Patricia. All of them. The company is essentially bankrupt. surviving only on rental income from properties that are mortgaged beyond their current value. Jason stared at his father with a mixture of shock and betrayal. "You've been planning for me to take over a bankrupt company? I thought I could turn things around before you graduated. I thought the Maple Street project would generate enough profit to stabilize everything. Instead, you mortgaged our house to fund a project that failed spectacularly," I added. "And now you're 3 months behind on mortgage payments to a bank that sold your loan to me." The family sat in stunned silence as the complete picture emerged. Their successful real estate empire was a mirage built on borrowed money and failed investments. The daughter they had dismissed as financially naive was now their only hope for avoiding complete financial collapse. "What happens now?" Melissa asked quietly. I looked around the table at faces that had spent years looking at me with disappointment and condescension. Now they were looking at me with fear, uncertainty, and something that might have been respect. "Now we discuss terms," I said. The negotiation that followed wasn't what anyone expected, least of all my family. I didn't demand apologies for years of dismissal, didn't gloat over their financial desperation, and didn't use my newfound power to humiliate them the way they had humiliated me. Instead, I did what I had always done. I analyzed the situation objectively and developed a practical solution. "Here's what I'm prepared to offer," I said, pulling out a document I had prepared with my attorney. "I'll restructure Dad's debts and save the family business, but it will be on my terms." My father leaned forward eagerly, relief evident in his eyes. "Whatever you need, Emma, we'll agree to anything reasonable. First, all family assets get consolidated under a single holding company that I control. No more shell games, no more moving debt between subsidiaries to hide problems. Complete financial transparency." Jason objected immediately. "You can't just take over the entire family business." "I'm not taking it over, Jason. I'm saving it. But I won't invest my money in a company that operates the way this one has been operating." I continued outlining the terms. Patricia would retain ownership of the family home, but it would be refinanced through my company at favorable terms with guaranteed payment schedules. Jason could continue working in the family business, but he would start as a junior partner and earn his advancement through performance rather than inheritance. Most importantly, I said, the business focus changes completely. No more high-risk development projects, no more leveraging existing properties to fund speculation. We focus on acquiring and managing rental properties with sustainable cash flow. "That's not very exciting," Patricia said with disappointment. "Where's the growth potential?" "The growth potential is in not going bankrupt," I replied. "Sustainable 15% annual returns are better than spectacular failures that destroy everything you've built." My father absorbed the terms with the expression of a man who had run out of alternatives. "What about my role in the company?" "You remain as a senior advisor, but I make all major financial decisions. You have 40 years of experience in this market, and that knowledge is valuable, but your judgment about risk management needs oversight." The most difficult part of the conversation came when I addressed Jason directly. "You can continue working in the family business, but you need to understand that your previous expectations were based on inheriting something that doesn't actually exist anymore." "What do you mean?" "You thought you were going to inherit a successful real estate empire. What you were actually going to inherit was millions of dollars in debt and a company that was months away from bankruptcy. I'm offering you the chance to help build something sustainable instead." Jason struggled with the reality that his assured path to wealth and prominence had evaporated. "This isn't what we planned." "Jason," I said gently, "what you planned was based on a fantasy. Dad created an illusion of success that he couldn't maintain. I'm offering you something better, the opportunity to earn real success through actual work." The negotiation continued late into the evening, with family members gradually accepting terms that would save them from financial ruin, while acknowledging that I was now the senior decision-maker in family business matters. Patricia was the most resistant, struggling to accept that her stepdaughter, the one she had dismissed as impractical, was now controlling the family's financial destiny. "I don't understand how this happened," she said during a break in the negotiations. "How did everything change so quickly?" "It didn't change quickly, Patricia. It changed gradually over 5 years while none of you were paying attention. The only thing that happened quickly was your discovery of what I had already built. By midnight, we had reached agreement on a comprehensive restructuring plan that would consolidate all family assets under my control while providing security and opportunities for everyone. My father would retain his dignity and expertise while acknowledging my financial authority. Jason would have the chance to learn the business properly instead of inheriting a disaster. Patricia would keep her home and lifestyle while accepting realistic limits on spending. But the most important outcome wasn't financial. It was the fundamental shift in family dynamics that occurred when they finally saw me as I actually was, rather than as their projection of failure. 3 weeks later, the restructuring was complete. Thornton Properties had been dissolved and its assets transferred to Pinnacle Holdings. The family home had been refinanced with manageable payments. Jason had started working as my assistant, learning property management from the ground up instead of jumping into executive decisions he wasn't prepared to make. The change in how they treated me was profound. Patricia now asked my opinion about household expenses and investment decisions. Jason listened when I explained market analysis instead of dismissing my ideas as academic theory. My father, for the first time in my adult life, spoke to me as an equal rather than a child who needed guidance. The transformation wasn't without complications. Patricia struggled to adjust her lifestyle expectations, and Jason had difficulty accepting that his path to success would be longer and more difficult than he had anticipated. But for the first time, our family conversations were based on honest communication rather than elaborate pretenses. 6 months after the confrontation dinner, we held another family gathering, this time to celebrate Jason's engagement to Melissa and the successful completion of my acquisition of 2 additional apartment buildings. The conversation around the dinner table was different. Instead of performative success stories designed to impress outsiders, we discussed actual business challenges, market opportunities, and realistic growth projections. "Emma, I owe you an apology," my father said during dessert. "I spent years telling you that you needed to think bigger, but you were already thinking bigger than any of us. You just weren't talking about it." "I was talking about it, Dad. You just weren't listening." The acknowledgement was long overdue, but it marked a genuine change in how our family understood success, failure, and the difference between appearance and reality. 2 years later, I stood on the roof deck of my new office building, a converted warehouse in downtown Westfield that served as headquarters for Pinnacle Holdings, watching construction crews break ground on our latest project. Unlike my father's failed developments, this was a modest but carefully planned affordable housing complex that would provide quality rental units while generating steady returns for investors. Jason climbed the stairs to join me, carrying coffee and the morning property reports that had become our daily routine. He had transformed from the entitled Harvard graduate who expected to inherit success into a competent property manager who understood that sustainable growth required patience and attention to detail. "The Hartford Street apartments are at full occupancy," he reported. "The renovation of the downtown retail space is ahead of schedule, and we have 3 new acquisition opportunities that meet our investment criteria." Our investment criteria had become the foundation of Pinnacle Holdings' success: properties in stable neighborhoods with good schools, buildings that could be improved through careful management rather than expensive renovations, and rental prices that working families could afford while still generating appropriate returns. "What's the occupancy rate across the entire portfolio?" I asked. 96%. Same as last month. Our tenant retention rate is the highest in the county. The numbers reflected a business philosophy that prioritized long-term stability over short-term profits. By treating tenants fairly, maintaining properties properly, and keeping rents reasonable, we had built a reputation that attracted responsible renters and reduced the turnover costs that plagued other property management companies. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Lunch ready at noon if you can make it. Your father wants to show you the quarterly reports." The family dynamics had settled into a comfortable routine where my father served as senior advisor, sharing his knowledge of local markets and regulatory issues while accepting my authority over major decisions. Patricia had become genuinely supportive once she understood that my success provided more security than her husband's previous high-risk strategies. When I arrived at the family home for lunch, I found my father in his study, surrounded by financial statements and market analyses. At 65, he had discovered that consulting on acquisitions and advising on market trends was more satisfying than trying to maintain the illusion of empire building. Emma, look at these numbers, he said with enthusiasm that reminded me of his better moments from my childhood. Pinnacle Holdings has the best performance metrics of any property management company in the region. Consistent returns, minimal vacancies, excellent tenant satisfaction scores. The transformation in his attitude toward my business methods had been gradual but complete. He now praised the conservative approach he had once dismissed as unambitious. More importantly, I said, we're providing good housing for people who need it while building wealth sustainably. That's what success should look like. Patricia joined us for lunch with news that reflected how thoroughly our family's reputation had changed. The hospital board wants to know if Pinnacle Holdings would be interested in developing affordable housing for healthcare workers. They're looking for a developer who prioritizes quality and community benefit over maximum profit. Healthcare worker housing was exactly the kind of project that aligned with my values and business model. Essential workers needed quality, affordable housing, and thoughtful development could provide that while generating reasonable returns. I'll review the proposal, I said. If the numbers work and the community benefits, it could be exactly what we should be doing. Jason arrived as we were finishing lunch, excited about a conversation he'd had with the town planning board. They want to discuss zoning changes that would allow for more multifamily housing near the train station. If we get involved early in the planning process, we could develop something that really serves the community. The enthusiasm in his voice reflected his growing understanding that real estate development could be about building communities rather than just accumulating profits. Working from the ground up had taught him lessons about housing needs and market dynamics that his business school education had never addressed. What kind of timeline are they considering? I asked. 18 months for the zoning process, then another year for planning and approvals. It's a long-term project, but it could provide workforce housing for teachers, firefighters, police officers, people who serve the community but can't afford market-rate housing. This was the kind of opportunity that excited me most. Projects that addressed real community needs while building sustainable business value. Unlike my father's speculative developments that had enriched him while providing little community benefit, these projects created value for everyone involved. As the afternoon progressed, we discussed expansion plans that would extend Pinnacle Holdings' reach into neighboring towns while maintaining our focus on quality management and community benefit. The conversation was collaborative, with each family member contributing insights based on their expertise and experience. The transformation was complete when my father said something that would have been unimaginable 3 years earlier. Emma, I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've built. Not just the financial success, but the way you've built it. You've created something that benefits everyone, tenants, investors, the community. That's what I should have been trying to do all along. The acknowledgement meant more than any apology could have. He finally understood that my approach hadn't been small thinking or unambitious. It had been sustainable and ethical in ways that his empire building had never been. That evening, I returned to my apartment above the bakery, though I could now afford to live anywhere I wanted. The modest space reminded me of where I had started and why I had built Pinnacle Holdings according to principles that prioritized people over pure profit. My laptop showed messages from potential investors who wanted to partner with Pinnacle Holdings on similar projects in other markets. The sustainable approach that my family had once dismissed as unambitious was attracting attention from investors who valued consistent returns and positive community impact. But the most satisfying message was from a tenant in one of my first apartment buildings. Ms. Thornton, thank you for everything you've done to make this a real home for our family. The playground renovation means everything to our kids, and knowing we have a landlord who cares about the community makes all the difference. This was why I had built Pinnacle Holdings. Not to prove my family wrong or to accumulate wealth for its own sake, but to create something that improved people's lives while building sustainable prosperity. The girl they had called a failure had become exactly what she had always planned to be, successful but on her own terms, creating value that extended far beyond quarterly profit statements. Looking out my window at the lights of downtown Westfield, many of them illuminating buildings I now owned and managed, I realized that the most important transformation hadn't been my family's recognition of my success. It had been my own understanding that true success meant building something larger than myself, something that created value for everyone it touched. The mortgage I owned on my family's house was just a piece of paper. The real power had always been in the vision, determination, and values that built sustainable prosperity while serving the community that made it possible. Some stories end with revenge or vindication. This one ended with something better: transformation, understanding, and the quiet satisfaction of building something that would benefit people for generations to come. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.